Next up, we have Kiffer Card. Kiffer is a doctoral student at Simon Fraser University in the Faculty of Health Sciences under the direction of Dr. Bob Hogg, who is also my master's supervisor, actually. And he's a research assistant on the Momentum Health Study at the BC Centre for Excellence in HIV and AIDS. His research explores the social and technological foundations of behavior with the aim of optimizing prevention efforts among marginalized communities. Please join me in welcoming Kiffer.
Thank you. Okay, so this presentation focuses largely on applying Facebook to kind of spreading the messages that we find important. The programs that have been discussed this far rely heavily on online communities and online flows, and I don't think it takes a lot of convincing, so I won't spend time trying to sell the importance of online outreach and that has become in our world. So as what we did in this analysis is we went to Facebook and we used the Facebook API, which is an application programmer interface. And we started with 2 pages, CBRC and HIM, 2 of the communities that serve the gay community here in Vancouver. And we kind of what they call data crawled through these pages. And we started with those 2, and then it went down 1 level, and we identified the like structure between these organizations. And you'll see a graph in a moment that we'll spend a little bit of time just kind of looking through to understand kind of what the gay community is when we talk about community online. And then what we did is we identified 10 organizations from thousands that served Vancouver's gay community. Now it could have been, we could have chosen any 10 to really do the rest of the analysis. And of these 10, we took the page information, so how many likes they had, their fan count, talking about count, and post activity metric, which are all metrics that Facebook uses in their algorithm to make your Facebook content show up on somebody's timeline. Now, if you don't have a Facebook, that might have just sounded like a bunch of jargon, and I don't know how to explain it. It's this miracle that's come about via the internet and really a mystery to all of us. But those are the metrics that they use and they create. And so we use their metrics. And then we also collected post information, so the actual text of the post shared on these pages, the date and time it was posted, the type, whether it was a status or a video or a profile picture or whatever it was, the number of reactions measured in likes, comments, and shares. We use their engagement indicator because Facebook, to determine what shows up on your feed, they actually essentially just sum up all the engagements on your page and count those as reactions and use that as their algorithm to determine what shows up. And then we got anonymized user ID codes, which are like these 32-character alphanumeric digits that don't link to any person you can track, but they do link to a person somewhere in the magic that is the internet and Facebook. And then we also got the comment content. And then we uploaded all of that into a program called Gephi, which, like NodeXL, is maybe a more familiar one, but these are ways to basically take those alphanumeric IDs that we collected and connect them to the posts that they liked, commented, shared. So we know actually what users, even though we don't know anything about the users themselves, we know how they interacted with content within these 10 community-based organizations. We then coded the posts that were shared by these 10 community organizations. We used a RStudio to do this in the regex. It's a data mining technique to kind of identify things of interest. And so we selected these topics as being of interest. And we were curious, ultimately, how are these things diffusing through the internet? And that was kind of our interest. And what of these is driving that diffusion? And so we did PrEP, treatment, condoms, mental health stigma, testing, dating research. And then we also looked at features of posts. And this is like whether it's a question or an interrogatory. And we basically search for question marks. And Then we looked whether they invited people to do something like, hey, like this page or comment on this page. And then we looked at sentiment using the Hu and Liu lexicon, which measures sentiment. And this was actually created for marketing analysis to identify the positivity or negativity in people's comments when you go to Amazon.com and rate whatever it is you buy from Amazon. And so that was used, that lexicon was used and was able to give us an idea of how positive the posts were, how negative the general sentiment. The lexicon can also be broken down into like sadness and happiness and what are the different attitudes reflected. We didn't use those because they're not as validly tested as their positivity, negativity index. And then we created a negative binomial linear regression model using basically to understand, well, what gets users to engage with content? Because that really seems to be essential. If you spend a lot of time, and a lot of us do, on social media, we're always wondering, how do I get people to like my damn post? And how do I get people to vote for Hillary Clinton by my Facebook behavior, or whatever it is? And I failed miserably, but so maybe this whole thing doesn't work. But I didn't apply this, so anyways. So we looked at what is that engagement, and we said, okay, it's probably a factor of what type it is, right? If it's a picture or video, it's probably more likely. I know I love Vox or all these people who are now creating short, minute-long clips that capsulize something into a small, easy to digest material. The content, so is it about PrEP? Is it about condoms? Is it about these health things? As a health scientist, those are the things I'm interested in, but you could hypothetically do this with any number of things. The sentiment, how positive it was, the engagement strategies we talked about, and then the post day and time when it was posted. And then also, the reason we used a mixed effects model is because we want to say, well, just because one organization has more likes, just because one organization is quite large on Facebook, we want to control for the fact that their content may very well get greater engagement. And so the first results from that is this, and you mentioned you have a busy slide, but I think you didn't know about mine. So this is, of course, a very busy slide, but it has an easy to digest message, I think. Now, if we go around, what this is this is the Gephi model. So this is used to create kind of a network of the organizations that were liked or liked by or did themselves like that starting chain, starting with CBRC and him and going down. So basically, we're trying to characterize what is the gay community by looking at the content that these Facebook pages are looking at. And so as you can see, there's this traditional, it gets better, stop homophobia, GLAAD, no hate campaign, gay times, Katy Perry, RuPaul. These things that maybe encapsulate a sort of gay rights movement. Starting here is where we have a lot of our community organizations, and this is where we selected from, like Community AIDS Vancouver, Dr. Peter Center, Youth Co., Positive Living. As we go up in this model, we start to see a lot of local stuff, so Vancouver. So right, gay, you could say, judging by this, you could say, well, that's the gay community, pretty obviously. But is what our model was able to do is able to say, no, being gay is more than just about that, and that the community is actually centered here in Vancouver, and so of course we would expect to see these pages being interested in, well, what is CBC doing, what is Vancouver Public Library doing, and the opera and the symphony and all the other things we love that are not necessarily gay focused. And the colors here are modularity classes, and so they kind of highlight communities within communities. And so it kind of shows the multifaceted nature of the gay community online. Interesting enough, you see this little gray spot up here. It pulled in a Haidiguai, so we can see there's a sub-community here, likely connected largely because of the local communities, which we can say, that's probably not necessarily part of the gay community specifically, and that is highlighted by the way that it was kind of pulled out from the community. And then you have interesting PHAC and Health Families BC and these kind of Canadian health organizations, which are vital to the work we do in the gay community because they provide a lot of funding. with that pulls in a lot of Ottawa stuff. The dark gray here pulls in a lot of Toronto stuff. So we see, I read a paper that was questioning, well, what is the gay community? It did a bunch of surveys, and I think 30% of the people were like, well, the gay community is my local experience of being a gay person, it's my social group. And then other people were like, well, it's this global experience of being a gay person and kind of this global fight. And this kind of says, well, yeah, it's that, it's both, right? We are in some ways connected to even Toronto. And then, of course, a huge part of this overall map is the HIV/AIDS community within it. And there's actually a little pink one that's the Kelowna community, which if you're familiar with, a little bit more interior BC, the wine country. So that's kind of this overall structure. So from that is what we selected our 10 community-based organizations. And this is where we pulled in we took those comments, all the comments or all the posts that they made to their pages, and we fed that in, and then we identified all these little blue and yellow and red dots. Those are all individuals who are connecting. So you see some individuals are connecting once, maybe twice. Some individuals are connecting multiple times. But you can see that the network is actually quite cohesive. In total here is represented about 23,000 followers of these pages. But this diagram here represents 21,000 people, 74% of which were unique to just one community organization. So we think, are we oversaturating the gay community, with content? If I post it, is him or CBRC or community also going to post it? And those people are just going to be bombarded with this and not be interested? Well, that seems to be unlikely, considering 74%. That also indicates, using these models, kind of indicate that there is broad out-of-network diffusion, which means that there is a core group of people connecting with these Facebook pages, a core group who are both, as you can see on figure 10, that they engage highly in these groups. And then also in figure 11, there's a core group that engages in multiple groups. And so these are your core set of users. However, the vast majority, and the Spearman ranks shows that there's a correlation between those two things. So if you're more active on pages, you also might be participating in more pages. And so over 5 years of data that this has collected, the vast majority of people participated only once with any of the content, which tells you that the information is diffusing out largely, that these people, this core group is liking it. And so while our data didn't collect any information on participants, it highlights the importance of trying to figure out who is this core group of users and how can they, as opinion leaders, how can they, as leaders in the community, be leveraged to improve the diffusion of our information. And so future research will hopefully explore that. Regarding post content, this is, I think, one of my favorite slides. This looks at, well, what is the content over time? And there's lots of interesting trends. First, you can see since the kind of Resist Stigma campaign, which was one of the organizations we included to look at, and the CBRC, since they came about, stigma has greatly increased. And now I don't provide here the breakdown by community organizations, but when we actually look at the breakdown by community organizations, we see that not only did Resist Stigma increase their discussion around stigma, but a lot of the other community-based organizations too. And it shows that a focused effort can actually improve the theme or the topic for all the other organizations as well. Now that might not be part of some intentional decision-making, but it does show that like this unity between groups is actually important in that they influence each other. And so creating a focused campaign within a close-knit community like Vancouver's can actually be very positive. We also see that like over time, PrEP, if you look, I don't know how to make my mouse show up there, but PrEP actually increased as well. Now these are low-S smoothed, and so they look smoother than the actual data is. These are by month. But so that leads you to some of the data on the edges is harder to tell what's going on because it's going to tend to follow whatever that latest trend was. But we can kind of see what's being yearned for in the community. You know, what are they liking? What are they engaging with? And so that's where the models that we built came in. And this looks at all those predictors that I talked about and just gives us, if you look IRR, the incidence risk ratio, that shows how often, or that's basically like an odds ratio you can interpret about the same way. How much does it improve the diffusion of that specific thing? As you can see, photos and media and links to websites increase diffusion a lot more than just having text. And so if you're going to post something, finding a way to post it in photo form or something is likely to increase diffusion. Regarding health messages, we see that PrEP, stigma, and mental health greatly increase diffusion. By PrEP, it's 264%. And so, there's a lot of interest in PrEP right now. So a lot of, and you can use this to kind of look at, well, should our agenda be? You actually look at dating, for instance, which I think this is interesting, worthy of thought and discussion. Dating actually had a negative relationship, so stuff that post about dating, and that might just be to do to the demographic or relationship composition of people who engage on Facebook. Weekday and time of, or weekday wasn't really significant, so if you're posting on weekend or weekday, it really didn't make a big difference. But the time of day did. If you posted in the morning as opposed to during work or after work, those posts were more likely to diffuse well, and I think that's, at least from my anecdotal experience, it's I wake up in the morning and do all my social media first thing, and so whatever's there at the top of that is likely to get most interest. And then we can see sentiment, so the more positive posts, which I was a little bit surprised because I know a lot of sarcastic and a lot of my friends are that way. So I was like, that's the stuff I like on Facebook. So I was actually surprised to see, and this is supported by the evidence, that positive material shared better. And asking questions, and invitations actually decreased engagement, which was also an interesting find. When applying this to the diffusion of information, because we had great out-of-network diffusion, we know that this core group are kind of like the innovators that we think of in classical diffusion of information models. And classical diffusion of information relies on these 5 kind of key indicators when we're trying to promote something in the community. And that's the acceptability, simplicity, triability, observability, and relative advantage. As you can see, acceptability is large part what we're probably capturing with a lot of this engagement, is whether they like it, how simple it is. Triability is probably not easy to influence via the internet. It's hard to convince somebody to try something over the internet. But observability through testimonials and then really hammering out the relative advantages of a candidate or a health prevention technique is really important. So as we design our social media interventions, those are the things we should look for. Regarding this research, there are some limitations in that we selected those 10 community-based organizations, and in what way different communities might react differently to content is not widely explored. Also, the analyses here are not person level, right? We're not able to tell you anything about the people engaging with this, which that very well may be an important part. And then the search taxonomies are untested scales, right? That's the problem with big data analysis, is it's new, and so a lot of these things are untested. And then also engagement may be more complex than that, right? There might actually be different predictors for whether someone reacts to a page than if they share it. And I think if we want people to share, we might need to understand those more fine definitions. And so that's all I have.